Hi there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at.
A small business can't take that.
The latest on a suburban bakery targeted for hosting drag performances.
Political stuff happens outside of this. We will take care of them and help them.
Meet a local pastor helping migrants bust to Chicago from the border.
Older people hope to shore up their power before there's a new mayor in town.
And the pressing issues facing public schools as the city chooses its next mayor a week from today. And we start tonight with a WTTW News exclusive. A new lifeline for a suburban business targeted for hosting drag performances. Earlier this month, the owner of Uprising Bakery and Cafe in Lake in the Hills announced she'd close her doors after months of harassment, protests, and threats.
The attacks came after the cafe announced plans to hold 2 family-friendly drag shows as part of an event series. But as Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, Uprising's owner is now planning to stay in operation and find a new home for her business.
Karina Sack thought she'd have to shutter her bakery and cafe at the end of the month.
I've never experienced this kind of vitriol, hate, and intolerance in the local community.
But a wave of online attacks flooded the business after announcing plans to host 2 family-friendly drag shows.
It was after-hours ticketed event. All ages were welcome, and we worked really hard with finding great local performers who understood what all ages was about.
Since the events were announced in July, Sack says personal information about her family was posted online. The building was vandalized, and protesters gathered outside for 126 days straight.
And then when it got too cold for them to protest, they switched to online. Bad reviews, misinformation, false calls to the health department. Anytime they see us doing an event here, they call the police on us.
The attacks on Sack's business come amid a wave of legislation targeted at the LGBTQ+ community, particularly trans people, and of attacks on queer-friendly spaces, including a deadly mass shooting at a Colorado Springs nightclub. Numerous other drag events have faced demonstrators or were canceled altogether because of threats.
I was born and raised here. I was born bisexual. It was such a welcoming place for me. And so when all of that happened, it's been kind of like, well, this is my home. What's happening?
After months of threats, Sack announced plans to close earlier this month. But supporters started a GoFundMe campaign that far exceeded its $30,000 goal. Sack says that means Uprising can keep going.
It is very clear that people want us here. They don't just believe in what I'm doing, what my staff is doing in our establishment. They also want a safe space in their community.
That's why Sack says she's committed to staying in McHenry County, but with her Lake in the Hills location targeted for so long, she plans to find a new home for Uprising.
People really came to our aid. That gives me and my family a little more hope, and it just solidifies that what we're doing is right.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
Sack says she hasn't found a new space for the bakery yet, but that she's looking to move as quickly as possible.
And now to some more of today's top stories. The government's star witness in the ComEd Ford trial tells jurors he believed the alleged bribery plot involving former House Speaker Mike Madigan was, quote, just not right. Fidel Marquez, the company's former VP of Government Affairs, was on the witness stand for the second straight day. Jurors saw video recordings Marquez made detailing the alleged plot to award Madigan allies no-work jobs in exchange for Madigan's assistant passing legislation that would result in a windfall for the company. Former consultant Jay Doherty, retired executive John Hooker, former Madigan fixer Mike McLean, and former CEO Ann Pramaggiore are all facing federal bribery charges. And you'll find more coverage on today's events in the ComEd bribery trial on our website.
The LaSalle Street corridor, once a hub for office spaces, will be home to more than 1,000 Chicago residents. If this gets approved, the city has selected 3 proposals to breathe new life into the city's financial district.
We are making the largest affordable housing commitment ever in downtown Chicago, and that we are also making one of the largest office to residential conversions in the entire country. So we are rising to the challenge of our times with unprecedented equity-centered ambition here in Chicago.
The three proposals selected would invest $550 million in building more than 1,000 apartments, with a third of them set aside for low and moderate income residents. City officials launched an effort to revitalize the corridor, which has been underutilized since the pandemic changed how and where Chicagoans work. All three proposals would still need approval from the City Council.
Speaking of proposals, have any ideas for the future of the Chicago Park District? The agency wants to hear from you. Today, the Park District announced a request for proposals for a strategic plan to, quote, move the district into the future. CEO Rosa Escareño says applicants should come up with ways to reimagine the purpose and structure of parks, new recreational programs, and a budget plan to put the district on a sound fiscal path. Proposals are due April 28th.
And you can always count on young people for a good party, but these young people were partying to the polls. Hundreds of eligible high school voters from 13 Chicago public schools took part in the democratic process by casting their vote. After the rally in Millennium Park, students voted at the Maggie Daley Fieldhouse early voting location. They also heard from Reverend Jesse Jackson, who led a prayer for the victims of the Nashville school shooting. The party was organized by Chicago Votes, a nonprofit that advocates and organizes for voting rights. And with the runoff election just a week away, don't forget to visit our WTTW News voter guide for more information on the candidates for mayor and city council. You can search by name, race, or ward and find out where candidates stand on the issues in their own words. Just visit WTTW.com/voter guide.
Coming up in the program, what's at stake for public schools as the city chooses its next mayor?
But first, a local pastor making a difference in the lives of migrants bused to Chicago. Joanna Hernandez has that story right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
It's been more than 6 months since hundreds of migrants arrived in buses from the Texas border. Joanna Hernandez visits a congregation in Chicago's North Austin neighborhood, helping asylum seekers through their journeys.
Good morning, lady.
It's all hands on deck inside this food pantry. Pastor John Zayas of Grace and Peace Church runs the operation.
We do our food bank in partnership with Greater Chicago Food Depository, and what we've done here is we try to help families in our community with food that they don't receive, right?
That mission now goes beyond the food pantry. Gracias. Last year, Pastor Zayas and his wife Ileana opened the doors of their church to welcome dozens of migrants arriving on buses from Texas.
And once they were coming here, we were able to feed them, clothe them. They received showers and a night stay. OEMC would then place them in different places to live.
Cribeli Ramirez is one of the migrants who arrived to Grace and Peace Church on a bus from the border.
Pasar en mi situación de embarazada, caminar 3, 4, 5 horas, pasar bajo sol, bajo lluvia, sin poder comer a veces. Con las piernas raspadas, sin las uñas, o sea, sí, pero gracias a Dios, pues Dios nos dio la oportunidad y podemos llegar.
The mother of two says the congregation has given her family a fresh start from the hardships of Venezuela.
Vimos el gran empeño que hace la iglesia por ayudar a los demás, entonces eso nos motivó a cada día y siempre cuando tenemos la oportunidad venimos a colaborar y ayudar a otras personas que como nosotros pasaron.
People helping people is what Pastor Zayas says started to happen. Demand for services started to grow.
Returning migrants that we get weekly, about 150 that would come here weekly, receiving services. But we still get families that have come from, now they're coming from other states and trying to find benefits and resources and help.
Zoraidi Pereira and her 2 kids spent 10 days walking through the Panamanian jungle. Her 10-year-old son, Emmanuel, made the long journey with one leg.
El barro me agarraba la muleta y me la tenía ahí y era tanta fuerza que yo luchaba que de mentira que estaba aquí y cuando le iba a sacar era más difícil que ya estaba.
¿Tenías miedo?
It's the first time Pereira is visiting the church in hopes of getting help for her son.
Yo quiero que mi hijo camine y allá en Venezuela yo no iba a poder hacer eso, así yo trabajara una eternidad de 7 a 7, no se podía.
Emmanuel had his leg amputated when he was just 4 years old.
Yo siempre he estado en médicos, en médicos, en médicos, en médicos. Y siento que ahorita estamos ya en la recta final, que lo que falta es la prótesis y sus terapias para que él comience a caminar y ya de allí, bueno, ya de allí se independiza, ¿verdad, papi?
Sí.
What started as a youth program in 1995 has expanded to a massive operation, a mission Pastor Zaya says is God's work.
Where does your passion come from?
I'm called to. Period is I'm called to, you know, and not just myself, but a staff of folks that are all called to help people, right? And so we're just called. It's not about a paycheck. It's about being called to this type of work and helping the folks who are the most marginalized, the most needy.
Thank you.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
Pastor Zayas says the next project is getting a clinic in the building, and the food pantry operates every Tuesday and Thursday. And we're back with more right after this.
Regardless of the next mayor, city council members are poised to take an imminent vote to give themselves more independence from the fifth floor. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us to break down what's in this proposal and whether it's likely to be approved. So, Heather, tell us about this proposal and how it would change the dynamic at City Council.
Well, the City Council has always had the power to pick their own committee chairs, but it's a power they have deferred to Chicago mayors for decades. And the centerpiece of this proposal would be to name their own committee chairs, even though there are 14 city council runoffs, and of course we don't know whether Paul Vallis or Brandon Johnson will be the next mayor of Chicago.
Right, traditionally this has been a power reserved to the mayor and a power that they really used as a carrot here to control older people. So there's 27 committees right now. That means that the majority of council members would be a committee chair. How much would all this cost?
Well, it will cost millions, perhaps as much as $6 or $7 million, because each committee has an average budget of almost $300,000. Now, it's not clear exactly what committee will get what budget, and of course that would be up to the next mayor of Chicago, who by law has to propose a budget and could scuttle all of this once he gets into office.
Obviously, a reminder here for viewers, this is one of the reasons that older people love these chairmanships, because money and jobs.
That's
they can
right.
give people jobs. So where's the opposition to this plan coming from?
Well, both the Better Government Association and the League of Women Voters don't want this vote to take place on Thursday. They say it is better to take place after this new city council begins its new term, after May 15th with the new mayor in office. They say it will disenfranchise those wards that hasn't finalized their pick for the city council. Also, there has not been a lot of time for public review of whatever it is could be up for a vote on Thursday.
How unusual. We never see stuff like that, Heather. Okay, I'm being facetious, of course, to our viewers. So we're going to have a new mayor in May, but we're also going to have more than a dozen new city council members. Are any of them saying, well, let's put the brakes on this, we want to say?
Well, it's interesting because there is a proposal floating out there to name both Alderman Gilbert Villegas and other alderman people who are facing runoffs as committee chairs. So if they lose, that means that this will all be up for grabs, and it's also going to be a very different city council no matter what happens in these runoffs, with much more younger, much more Latina, and much more progressive city council candidates than even this past city council was.
And very quickly, I know Paul Vallis has kind of endorsed this whole idea. What about Brandon Johnson?
He has too. He says that the city council should operate as an independent legislative body, something it has never done in its storied history.
This would be something very different for those of us that cover this like you, Heather. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
Read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Up next, what education challenges face the city's next mayor, so please stay with us. An elected school board, a new teachers union contract, the end of a moratorium on school closures. Those are just some of the education hurdles facing Chicago's next mayor. The city's next leader will be overseeing Chicago public schools during what is expected to be a transformative period. And joining us to talk about all this are Elaine Allensworth, Executive Director of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, and Charles Tachi, Assistant Professor of Education at Loyola University, Chicago. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. So let's set the stage with the bigger picture here, Elaine Allensworth. Enrollment is down around a quarter over the last decade. Parents have cited things like the constant turmoil, labor stoppages as reasons that they pulled their kids from classes there. How can CPS turn this long-term decline around?
Yeah, well, the biggest driving factor is the change in the population. In Chicago and the whole state of Illinois, we've seen huge declines in school-age population. So I think one very important factor is what are we doing as a state and a city to attract people and to keep families so that the city, making sure the city is affordable, livable, a place where people want to be.
So it's tied to obviously these bigger demographic changes. Charles, according to CPS, 40% of schools are deemed underutilized right now. 22 high schools have less than 250 students as their enrollment. A moratorium on further school closures will lift in 2025. What should the next mayor do about this situation?
Yeah, this really is a pressing issue because it is a significant cost for the district, and it does bear on the quality of education that under student-based budgeting schools are able to offer in these under-enrolled smaller population schools. I worry about closures as the first line of approach to this issue because there is a long history of mistrust and harm between CPS and many of the communities across the city, especially on the south and west side, especially our black communities. And so I think it really has to be a strategy of investment. How do we build in the schools? I think we've heard both candidates talk about this. Vallis talk about extending nights and weekend programs, keep buildings open more often, which harkens back to an Arnie Duncan style approach. And we've heard Johnson talk about creating new programs and utilizing space and buildings in new ways. It'd be nice to see more about that and what that looks like and how those programs get resourced.
Right, both candidates to some extent have talked about repurposing some of these under-enrolled schools, but when you look at the fiscal situation at CPS, could be a gap of about $500 million or so in the next couple of years. How can the system afford to go on the size it is when that enrollment keeps shrinking?
Yeah, well, I think one thing you have to consider is there actually are costs to closing schools that a lot of times people don't think about. So it's not just a matter of looking at the number of students and the number of staff members and reorganizing them in a smaller number of buildings. Whenever you close schools, there are logistical costs. There are also costs in terms of relationships, in terms of community, and there are also effects on schools that are receiving schools that receive those new students and staff where they may also feel feelings of loss because there are different norms, there may be different curricula.
So closing schools is not an automatic cost savings.
It's not an automatic, that's right, yeah.
So perhaps repurposing some of these schools?
Right, or thinking about what are the other options, and then certainly thinking about what are the other options, what are the strengths in the in the schools that you can build on, and then if it does come to that, really being thoughtful about how it's done, because the way that it's done, the messaging can make a huge difference in terms of people's feelings and of loss, and also the long-term harm that can be done for both students and teachers.
So a lot to consider for the next mayor. And the next mayor, Charles, is not going to have the kind of control over CPS that the mayor has enjoyed for the last 30 years, although in the first term here, we should lay this out. There's going to be a hybrid school board starting in 2 years where the mayor appoints 11 members and then 10 are elected. How do you think this will impact the system and students and parents?
I think this is going to be a transformational period for CPS. I think the first piece of this is how does the next mayor help reimagine what an independent CPS looks like in relationship to all of the other agencies in the city. There's been some talk about how this gets unwound, and I don't think that's the right metaphor. It's really about redeveloping, renegotiating the relationships between CPS and all of the other parts of the city government. The second piece of this is how will we carve up the map to create a school board that's reflective of the demographics of the city? What does that electoral map look like? And then the third piece is how much immediate fundamental change will each would the new mayor try to make? Will they try to open a number of charters? Will they try to close a number of schools? Will they try to fundamentally change the profile of the district before handing over control in 2028?
And Elaine, at some point it will be fully elected school board of 21 members. There are concerns about 21 political races and special interests dominating those races. Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I think about is how important it's going to be that we have really strong evidence about what's happening in schools that people can use. And I say that for two reasons. I mean, one, we'll probably have many different political perspectives in our school board. If we're going to have productive conflict, productive conversations, we need to make sure that people are all operating from the same understanding of what's happening in the schools and not hearsay and assumptions. And then we've got to make sure that you know, the public knows what's actually happening in schools so that they can make good decisions in their interactions with those school board members.
Yeah, a lot of folks are concerned that the teachers union might be funding a lot of races, or charter interests might be funding a lot of races, or companies that want contracts with CPS might have something to do. All of that could be at play in the next several years. Speaking of charter schools, Charles, is there empirical evidence here that says that charter schools are a net positive or negative on education outcomes in an urban school district?
I think across the board the evidence is mixed. They work in some cases for some people and at some times. So there's not clear-cut evidence that charters are better than public schools or that charters always are worse than public schools. There's a mixed bag of evidence. I think the fundamental question is, how do we fully resource and meet the needs of students across all school types? The basic question is how we drive the necessary resources into those schools, whatever type they are. And that's the basic problem that the new mayor and eventually the board is going to have to tackle.
And both candidates have said one of the big things they want to do is go to Springfield for more state money. Now, again, for some context, the lawmakers in Springfield several years ago did change the formula. More money did come to CPS. How much more money do you think state lawmakers might be willing to allocate to CPS?
I'm not going to speak for state lawmakers. Who knows?
Is that the best approach then for funding the resources that the schools need?
Well, you know, resources are generally helpful in terms of, you know, being able to have sufficient staffing, sufficient resources. Money alone is not going to solve things, though, too. So it's where you're putting your money, and are you actually putting resources into programs and supports that are known to help students, to support teachers. If you just throw money at schools, you know, it actually can make things more chaotic, right? And so really, you know, being thoughtful about the kinds of programs that are put into place, the kinds of policies, and where those resources are going.
And Charles, both candidates have talked about that. Paul Vallis says, well, 60% of resources are not going to the actual schools, or they're staying in the central office, or something like that. And Brandon Johnson saying, just overall, we need more resources. Where's the truth here in terms of how the resources are being allocated?
It's a complex picture. CPS is a massive institution with hundreds of schools and a large budget with many, many different offices. And it's also entangled with other city agencies. Money goes to the CPD, money goes to the Park District. It's hard to parse out where everything goes.
All right, Elaine Allensworth, just very quickly, we know that student reading and math scores across the nation went down as a result of the pandemic and the stoppage there. What about CPS? How are those test scores looking right now?
Right. Well, math scores went down. We know that. You know, reading scores, actually, if you look at the NAEP, which is the assessment that I think I have the most faith in, actually didn't go down significantly in Chicago. But we do know that during the time of remote learning, and since, you know, there were many students that really struggled, and especially at particular schools, we see students really struggled. And so really thinking about how we make sure those students and those schools have the supports they need. And I have to say, it wasn't all students. You know, people have this idea, oh, the pandemic was really hard for everybody, and it really was. But when we look at student engagement, you know, during the pandemic, we see that it really differed by what grade level students were in, and then what school they attended.
So some students fared okay, some students not so much. Wasn't the one size fits all. All right,
That's
Elaine Allensworth, Charles Tachi, a lot of very important issues. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we're back with a look at what's on tap for tomorrow, right after this.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. You can also get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 10. From downtown to the neighborhoods, what business leaders would like to see from their next mayor.
Plus a recap of testimony and what's next in the so-called ComEd 4 trial with our Spotlight Politics team. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a wonderful evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
On Agatha Christie's Poirot.
Book for me a passage tonight on the Orient Express.
While aboard a train,
Mr. Poirot, I have enemies.
a shady man is murdered.
He has been stabbed maybe 15 times.
And everyone on board is a suspect.
He was standing here, a dark figure.
Can Poirot solve the case?
Impossible.
Find out
I think that there are two solutions to this murder.
on Agatha Christie's Poirot.
Thursday at 7 on WTTW.
Next time on The Coroner.
I'm not the police.
Her job is to determine cause of death.
He didn't kill himself.
But for Jane Kennedy,
Sorry.
staying out of the way just isn't her style.
As the coroner, I'm asking you to investigate.
And working with her cop ex-boyfriend can be messy.
I didn't say that!
No, there's a lot you don't say.
The acclaimed mystery series,
Perfect.
The Coroner.